uh, Book 3 Garnering, and this chapter 1 is titled as Another Thing Needful. Now, in this chapter, we find that now Louisa has come back to her father's place, and now when she wakes up in her old room in her father's house, and she finds her younger sister, Jane. Now, in this chapter, we find that Louisa understands that she has been taken care of by Cece the night before, and she also finds that compared to her, her younger sister, Jane, is much happier. And then Mr. Gradgrind comes to check on Louisa, and then he assures her of his intentions, that when he wanted her to marry Bonderby, actually he did not have any. He only wanted her to be happy, and her intent and whatever intentions he had in his life, all have been, meant for her good, but he never thought that this would be the consequence. And now we find that Mr. Gradgrind has started rejecting his former convictions, that only a fact is needed in an individual's life to become successful. And not only that, we find that he's no longer in a position, to give advice to anyone, because he doesn't have that, he finds himself incapable of advising anyone. So he holds himself like responsible for Louisa's present misery and the plight in which she finds herself, because he knows that it is only because of his education of facts that now Louisa has arrived in such a miserable state. And apart from this, in this chapter we find that Cece tries to comfort Louisa in her own way. And though Louisa's behavior towards Cece from the very beginning has been a bit indifferent, but gradually we find that it is their mutual affection, their love for each other, and this reconciliation that helps them to come close to each other. And Mr. Gradgrind also accepts the belief now that apart from the wisdom of the head, which means apart from facts, there is also a wisdom of the heart. Now, here in this chapter, the role played by Cece Jupe is significant, because throughout the novel we find that she is the only one who showed the wisdom of the heart. And in this chapter, when Louisa, she completely succumbs and clings to her, we find that the social roles between them get reversed. Why? Because if we could look at the social status of both these girls, Louisa and Cece Jupe, then Louisa's social position is superior to her. But when it comes to natural goodness, when it comes to wisdom, and when it comes to that moral insight, we find that Cece Jupe appears to be much superior to her, and therefore she is worthy enough to be her mentor and guide her to follow the right path. So here in this chapter, Dickens reminds us that Cece Jupe, despite despite her humble origins, that is not belonging to the upper class, and despite her low position even in the Gradgrind household, because she has been taking care of Mrs. Gradgrind so far, when it comes to Louisa, she is much superior to her in her wisdom, in her foresight, in her moral insight, and therefore she is worthy to be her mentor. Apart from that, the importance of emotional understanding is also emphasized by this chapter, because if you look at the title, that another thing needful, so now the entire Gradgrind family, like Mr. Gradgrind and Louisa, they do understand that how much emotional understanding is needed in an individual's life. And it is not that fact is not needed. Of course, fact is needed in an individual's life, but along with that, fancy or imagination or sentiments, emotions are also equally, important for a holistic human development. We also find that after Louisa's emotional breakdown in the final chapter of book 2, this transformation is seen in Mr. Gradgrind. So somewhere we feel as readers that maybe this emotional breakdown of Louisa was necessary to make Mr. Gradgrind realize that how much emotions and imagination are important for human development, to enable someone to to encounter the outside world with courage. And then finally we see that the initial coldness that was shown by Louisa towards Sissy is now replaced by their mutual affection and reconcile. That now they come to a reconciliation, come to an emotional understanding with each other, and it is their mutual affection, care for each other that brings them close to each other. Chapter 2 is titled as very ridiculous, because here we find James Harthouse appearing to be very ridiculous, and he is made ridiculous by none other than C.C. Job. Now, here we find that Tom pays a visit to James Harthouse in order to know that why he did not appear at the station the night before, and that Harthouse just puts forward his own excuse that he was detained, and Tom keeps on complaining for having waited for him at the station for such a long time, and he also informs him that he has not seen Lucy as well. This chapter is important because it portrays Sissy Jupe as a very courageous, determined and sincere woman. Why? Because now Sissy Jupe would meet Harthouse personally in order to convince him to leave Coketown forever and not to never return and never think of communicating with Louisa. And the way she carries herself, and with the determination and sincerity with which she persuades Harthouse, or the way she talks to Harthouse, it shows that it really needs a lot of courage to deal with a man like Harthouse, because we know that Harthouse is a wealthy man. He has a good social status. Not only that, he is the brother of a member of parliament, and moreover, he is Gradgrind's disciple. So, in spite of being the daughter of a circus clown, we find that Sissy shows much courage and understanding and wisdom the way she deals with James Harthouse, and she makes him leave Coketown forever. So, as far as morality is concerned, here too we find that Sissy is shown to be morally superior to the fine gentleman James Harthouse. And the humiliating irony is that although although belonging to the wealthy class, although having all privileges in life, but James Harthouse is defeated by a simple girl, by a simple uh, woman, by simple woman who is the daughter of a circus clown, Sissy. This is the humiliating irony. So Sissy, Dickens in this chapter portrays Sissy as very courageous and understanding and wise, as I said. Now we have seen that after Sissy was left behind by her father, Mr. Jupe, she lived on the charity and goodwill of the Gradgrind family, because she was adopted by Mr. Gradgrind. And now we find that in the entire Gradgrind family, she is the only one who shows that wisdom and understanding about human nature. Sissy is very intelligent, and she has the capacity to understand the intention of James Harthouse very well. So, and therefore, it makes her at the same time, it is her wisdom and understanding that makes her also capable of taking a decision according to the situation, like according to the demand of the situation. So Sissy's understanding about Harthouse's attempted seduction as an amusement, she knew it very well. Louisa was unable, because as we all know that Louisa does not have that power of emotional understanding. But Sissy does have that, and therefore she is able to understand Harthouse's intention that whatever he was doing with Louisa, it was only meant for his own selfish amusement, that he was trying to seduce her. And so finally, and we find that how she, with the power of her words and determination and sincerity, makes James Harthouse comply with her command that he must leave Cooktown forever and never return back to communicate with Louisa Gradgrind. So here it shows that how C.C. Jupe is able to overwrite the status of his birth despite she herself having a lowly position in the society. So she is able to overwrite his social status as well as his wealth with her sincerity. Because in this chapter we find that how much concerned Cici is about Louisa Gradgrind and how much she cares for her. So when she meets James Harthouse and talks to him, it shows that that how much mature Cici is compared to Louisa. And in fact, when she asks James Harthouse to leave Cooktown, now her suggestion is immediately uh, dismissed by Harthouse. But Cici sticks to her command, sticks to her decision, and she very quietly repeats herself that he must leave Cooktown. And so when finally James Harthouse finds no other option, so he leaves Cooktown for the train. He packs his things, he writes a letter to Gradgrind, Bounderby, and he writes letters to his brother as well, and then he decides to leave his teaching post as well, and then he leaves Cooktown. And that he has been defeated so badly by such a simple girl like C.C. Jupe is later reflected on by James Harthouse, and he feels that that is the only incident that made him feel ashamed of himself. Chapter 3 is titled as Very Decided. Now, we know that Mrs. Parseet dislikes Louisa Gradgrind a lot, and we also know that how she has been plotting against her and how much determined she was to bring about her social decline. And the same thing is also evident in her action in chapter 3, because now Mrs. Parseet continues. She follows Mr. Bounderby to London, and there she goes and informs him about the elopement of Louisa and Harthouse, that though she does not have any evidence that Louisa has eloped with Harthouse, so she continues with her plotting against Louisa, and it is only on the basis of her own beliefs and assumptions that she informs Bounderby in spite of having no evidence. And not only that, we find that after this news, Mr. Bounderby immediately returns to Cooktown, and when Louisa is found in Gradgrind's house, and though we know that she is in a very weak emotional state, so Mr. Bounderby immediately accuses her of being disrespectful towards him. And here in this chapter, Mr. Gradgrind tries to convince Mr. Bounderby that Louisa is going to stay with him in his place for some time, and he also tells him that she does not have any affair with James Harthouse, and not only that, she did not even have any physical relationship with him. Mr. Bounderby, as we all know, he never listens to anyone. Okay, rather he expresses his disbelief and says that Louisa has never been respectful towards him, and not only that, Louisa has never even appreciated him for what he is, and so he immediately demands that Louisa should return home by noon. And if she does not return, then she should remain in her father's house forever. But Mr. Gradgrind, though he tries to though he tries to make Bounderby understand that her mental state is very weak, so it is better for her to stay with her family for some time, and after she recovers, she'll go back to his place. That is not understood by Mr. Bounderby, because we know Mr. Bounderby does not have the habit of listening to anyone's advice, and therefore immediately he decides that if she does not return by the afternoon the next day, then he would consider this marriage to be over. And not only that, we find that how he appears to be so rigid that he doesn't want to reconsider his decision. And Louisa does not return, and this loveless marriage between them comes to an end. So we know that Mr. Gradgrind and Mr. Bounderby, they had a friendship for a long, long time, but for Bounderby, this does not matter. So immediately, with the very moment he takes this decision, he utters these words, his friendship with Mr. Gradgrind ends there, along with his marital relationship with Louisa. Because for people like Bounderby, friendship, be it friendship or wife, this is not all these things do not have any value. They are like disposable commodities, anything which he can do away with at any point of time. So he did not even think for once that if he takes this decision, that his friendly relationship with Mr. Gradgrind would come to an end. Not only that, when here in this chapter, Mr. Bounderby's hypocrisy is also evident when he demands that Louisa should return to his home right away, or their marriage would come to an end. Because when he utters these words, he contradicts himself. Because now, if we look back, if we try to recall the advice that he gave to Bounderby, that when he told the advice that he gave to Stephen Blackpool, that since he married her, whether for the better or the first or for the worse, he should remain in the wedlock. So he contradicts his own advice that he gave to Stephen Blackpool with regard to his marriage, because he advised him not to end his wedlock, rather he should remain with his wife. And now the decision that he takes exposes his hypocrisy. So after this, we find that Louisa continues to live a respectable life in her father's place, which indicates that Bounderby did not, take any initiative to prove her adulterous relationship with James Harthouse publicly in order to seek divorce, because we know, as far as divorce laws are concerned, now the only thing needed on the part of Bounderby was just to prove this adultery against Louisa Gradgrind, but he did not do any such thing, which he could have easily done, despite Mr. Gradgrind's refutation or refusal that she had no such relationship, either physical, or she did not even have any affair as such with Harthouse. Chapter 4 is titled as Lost, because here we find that investigation regarding the robbery at Bounderby's bank continues, and a wanted poster is also displayed. Wanted poster of Stephen Blackpool is also posted by Slackbridge at the union meeting. So here Bounderby, again, now his relationship, his relationship with Louisa Gradgrind has come to an end. And now Bounderby again renews his efforts to solve the mystery of the bank robbery. And he offers a reward of £20 for the arrest of Stephen Blackpool. So we see that Bounderby still believes that Stephen Blackpool is the one who robbed his bank. And then he takes Tom along with him and Rachel. He goes to meet Louisa, because Louisa is the one person who knows that that she and Tom visited Stephen's place. So Louisa confirms of Rachel's story. So Rachel confirms after this is the story that is told to Bounderby by Rachel, that Tom and Louisa came to visit Stephen Blackpool, and in order to confirm that story, they are Tom along with Rachel. Both of them are taken to Louisa, and Louisa confirms that. Louisa also says that she offered monetary help out of sympathy, but which was very little, very meager, to Stephen. And then we find that how much Rachel is determined and how much is concerned about Stephen, because she tries to prove Stephen innocent. She declares that Stephen is innocent, and she informs that she has also written a letter to him to come to Cooktown to prove himself innocent. But Mr. Bounderby says that no letter is found, has reached, there is no record rather of any such letter in the post office. And Rachel tells him that actually, in order to get a new job for himself, Stephen had to change his name to find a job in some other city. And in this chapter, we find that Slackbridge also expresses his intense dislike for Stephen, and he also believes, actually it is his dislike that makes him believe that Stephen is guilty, and he is the one who committed the crime, who committed the robbery. This chapter is significant now. After this chapter is also significant because we see the transformation of Louisa and Mr. Gradgrind, because we find that gradually they evolve as empathetic beings, having emotions, responding with feelings, and they no longer rely only on facts, but they try to look at things from an emotional perspective. And here, after Rachel, Mr. Bounderby, and as I said, Mr. Bounderby and Tom leave, we find that Cece also promises to visit Rachel the next night to see if any information has arrived regarding Stephen. And after Rachel leaves, we find that Louisa and Mr. Gradgrind, both of them appreciate. Firstly, they accept that Stephen is innocent, because Mr. Gradgrind, he asks Louisa that whether she believes that Stephen is innocent or not, and Louisa says that yes, she does believe that he's innocent. And at the same time, we find both of them appreciating, Rachel's faith, extreme trust in Stephen Blackpool, which is also revealed in this chapter. Now, since another believing, everybody thinks that the letter that has been sent to Blackpool by Rachel has got lost. And since 2 days pass away and they do not receive any word from Stephen, Rachel gives up his address. But then again another week passes by with no information of Stephen, and then everyone wonders where he is. So everyone becomes very worried, and it is this Stephen's disappearance that makes him all the more guilty of the crime, because everyone feels that Stephen is reluctant, he's unwilling to come back to Cooktown, because he knows himself that he is not innocent, despite Rachel's continuous insistence that he is innocent. Chapter 5 is titled as Found, and it is also in relation to Stephen Blackpool. In this chapter, we find that Rachel is very anxious because she has not received any word from Stephen, and now she feels that maybe that if she wonders, like, if anyone has killed Stephen in order to keep him away from exposing the truth about the robbery. And Cece, we find that Cece has been visiting Rachel's place every night in order to collect news of Stephen. And here Cece's compassionate nature is revealed when she, attempts to comfort Rachel and also help her in finding out Stephen. So, and in the meantime, we find that Mrs. Parsit, now she has not given up her attempts. She is still continuing with her plot, and she's now what she does, she brings Mrs. Pegler, the woman, the old woman who was also suspected of being with Stephen Blackpool in the robbery, who was suspected of being involved in the robbery as well. So Mrs. Pegler is brought by Mrs. Stephen at Mr. Bounderby's house, where we find that Tom and Mr. Gradgrind were also present for a meeting. But unfortunately, what happens is that what Mrs. Sparsit did, she tracked down Mrs. Pegler, she seized her, and believing that she is also an accomplice in the crime. And when she says all these things to Bounderby, instead of being praised what she expected, Mr. Bounderby gets infuriated, and it is at this moment that Mrs. Pegler's true identity is revealed, that she is actually Mr. Bounderby's mother, and she's not a suspect. So everyone present there learns that Mrs. Pegler is actually Mr. Bounderby's mother, and she's not a suspect in the robbery. And here, we find that Mrs. Pegler also gets very offended when, after learning that she is Mr. Bounderby's mother, Mr. Gradgrind accuses her of abandoning her son and leaving him with an abusive grandmother. And now the truth is revealed, the actual truth related to Bounderby's parents and his upbringing. All the truth is revealed in the presence of Tom, Mr. Gradgrind, and Mrs. Sparsit. So Mr. Bounderby's mother reveals that her mother was a saintly woman, and she also informs Gradgrind that despite being poor, like she and her husband, they loved their son a lot. In fact, like after her husband's death, Mrs. Pegler worked herself. She worked very hard. She struggled a lot to send her son to school and also obtain an apprenticeship for him. And now she has a shop in a neighboring town, and Mr. Bounderby sends her £30 a year. But she has been strictly asked never to talk about him or visit him. So after this truth is revealed, it ashames Mr. Bounderby, because now he can no longer boast of being a self-made man. And when all the truth is revealed, Mr. Bounderby, he refuses to say anything with regard to these revelations made by his mother. He simply asks everyone to leave, because he knows it very well that now when the truth about his life has got revealed, it will get around the town quickly, and everyone will come to know about it very soon. So here we find that this is a situation of dramatic irony, because in the previous chapters we saw that several hints were dropped with regard to Mrs. Pegler, like if she is Mr. Bounderby's mother or not, and now everything is revealed, and that the entire life story, Mr. Bounderby's, turns out to be a complete fraud. That whatever narrative or whatever story he has been conveying to others with regard to his life was nothing but was completely false, that he has spent his years using his status as a self-made man to bully others, that is revealed. And just to gain respect in the community, so that people respect him, he simply went on bullying them with this story. So this chapter we find that in this, Mrs. Pegler is depicted as a very sad character, because Mr. Bounderby has not been a very good son. He has rather neglected his mother, and he simply, advised her not to see him. So every year she has to undertake this journey, to meet her son, to have a look at her son. So, however, we find that despite this neglect, Mrs. Pegler still has that love, that compassion for her son. And it is her feelings for her affection for her son that makes her visit this place every year. And then we find that as the chapter began by maintaining the reader's suspense, it also ends because it continues to have, because it maintains that, that reader suspense and curiosity, because still we do not know about Stephen Blackpool. We do not have any clue as to what has happened to Stephen Blackpool. So with this chapter ends, and the reader's suspense and curiosity is maintained. As far as chapter 5 is concerned, it is also important to note that the main action of this chapter, it is concerned with only two discoveries, two hidden things. Discovery of two hidden things. One is the mystery. One is concerned with the mysterious Mrs. Pegler, who is revealed to be Mr. Bounderby's mother, and that his inverted snobbery that he boasted of his childhood misery has no foundation in fact. It is all false. So these are the two main discoveries with which this chapter is concerned. So the two truths are revealed: that Mrs. Pegler is not an accomplice in the bank robbery, rather she is the mother of Mr. Bounderby, and that Mr. Bounderby always projected himself as a self-made man, and the story that he conveyed to others is nothing but false. It has no foundation in truth. It is not true at all. And that Mrs. Parseet's plot has misfired. She hoped that she would win Mr. Bounderby's favor, she would be praised, and he would express his gratitude, but instead she accomplishes exactly the opposite. He's sent away. Rather, Mr. Bounderby gets very, very infuriated. And we also find that after the revelation of the truth regarding his life, Mr. Bounderby also encounters the same humiliation that is faced by Harthouse. And it shows that even for some time he will be the laughing stock of Coketown, because people will now laugh at Mr. Bounderby for having projected himself as a self-made man so far. Chapter 6 is titled as The Starlight. In this chapter, we find that Sissy and Rachel, they go on a walk in the country now near Coketown in order to find out Stephen. And there they discover Stephen's hat, and then later on they find that he has got dropped down in a mine shaft known locally as Old Hell Shaft. And we find that he has fallen into that mining pit by accident, and this has caused him fatal injuries. And immediately Sissy goes away to find two men. She finds two men who help gather more assistance, and then they send a message to Louisa, and then the rescuers come, and Stephen is rescued, though though he's very badly injured, but then he is taken out of that mining pit. And here Stephen is happy to see Rachel, but here we find that Stephen had bad luck. We know that he suffered from intense bad luck, but now it ends with the worst luck. Why? Because now we shall see that Stephen shall die. But here, before he dies, he delivers a speech which is very significant. Stephen, here, the reason why he fell into the pit is because Stephen does not have money to afford transportation to go back to Coketown, okay, in order to defend himself. and so he fell into that mining pit, and the that path was very dangerous itself. So after this, he tells, while he lies there, he tells Rachel that he believes that Tom framed him for the robbery. And he also talks about, watching the stars while he lay in that pit. And he also expresses his belief that he saw the same star that actually guided pilgrims to Jesus' birthplace. So here is a very symbolic, appropriateness in the way uh, Stephen meets his death. Now the mine shaft there, we know that it is the dangerous mining pit that brings about his death. So it is very symbolical, because this mining shaft, this mining pit, has caused the death of many people earlier, when people walked in it, and now, even though nobody works there, it is no longer in operation, still it hungers for life. So it still claims men's lives. And that is why Stephen, while he was alive, while he became a victim of the industrial system. And now, even he meets his death as a result of the same callousness, of the same callous exploitation and indifference to human life and safety. Because, it is important to note here that this is not a natural hazard, that it is not something which happened naturally. It is that the mining pit, that this place, has not been made safe, is because of the greed and indifference of the people or the legislators, like Mr. Gradgrind, who are there in London, who are associated with law. They do not pay any attention to all these things. They do not pay any attention to making this mine safe. And it is also because of the result of greed and indifference of the local capitalists or industrialists like Mr. Bounderby, because they never thought it worthwhile that they should spend a little money in order to make the mine safe. And it is because of their callous attitude towards human life, towards their safety, that finally brought about Stephen's death. So if you look at the title, The Starlight, it is also significant because symbolically we find that Stephen has the kind of life that Stephen has spent could be compared to hell, and the pit where he dies, it is also quite similar to hell. So that the connection that Stephen was able to see the star while he was in the pit, it draws a connection to the biblical stars, and it implies that Stephen is finally taken out of that hell, and now the hell that he had lived in so long, and now he is moving towards his savior, and he is now moving towards a peaceful afterlife. So this is the connection. That is why this starlight, because this this star actually is, this association is in this reference is there in the Bible. This star actually guided the wise men to that place where Jesus Christ took place, and that is compared to this old hell shaft, this old hell pit, which stands in contrast with Jesus Christ's place of birth. So what we can conclude saying that it is the finally Stephen has been able to come out of his hellish life, and now finally he is, after his death, he is moving towards a peaceful afterlife. And not only that, Stephen dies, though he dies, but it is to his great satisfaction. He finds peace, at least, because he dies holding the hand of Rachel, the woman he loves. And not only that, he dies at least with this satisfaction, with this peace, that he has been able to declare his innocence of the crime of which he has been accused, that he has not robbed the bank. And therefore his death, his suffering, everything, provides sufficient evidence that he is innocent. Chapter 7 is titled as Whelp Hunting, and it is related to Tom because now Stephen's death has proved that he was innocent, that he did not commit the crime of the robbery. And during the time when everyone was busy rescuing Stephen, there Tom, Cece, Mr. Gradgrind all were present. And now when it is revealed, the truth is revealed by Stephen Blackpool before he died, Tom is able to understand that now the time has come when he has to escape, and Cece whispers to Tom in the crowd and she requests him to escape. So we find that Tom seeks Cece's help in order to escape, and then he hides himself at Mr. Sleary's circus. And Cece tells Mr. Gradgrind that she has asked Tom to find Mr. Sleary's circus, and that now now we find that the Gradgrind family plans to send Tom away from Cooktown, from the nearby port of Liverpool, so that he can escape Mr. Bounderby's anger. And then when Gradgrind and Cece arrive at Sleary's circus, they find that now Tom's face has been painted black to play a servant in order to hide his identity in one of. And after that performance, Mr. Gradgrind talks to Tom, who tells and he admits to before his father that he is the one who is responsible for the robbery of £150. And Mr. Gradgrind then tells Tom that now he has arranged for him to leave the country and that he is ready to forgive him as well. Now Tom's ingratitude is again seen here because he doesn't want to talk to his sister Louisa, or express his gratitude for her love. Rather, she is accused by him for not caring for him, which again depicts him as a very ingratitude character. So now while the circus troupe, the circus members, Gradgrind, all are ready, to transport Tom, all are ready to send Tom away, suddenly Bitsar arrives. And their attempt, to save Tom is suddenly threatened by the sudden arrival of Bitsar. So now it is true, now Bitsar wants Tom to be handed over to law. Now he has his self-interest behind it. He has his own vested interest, because we know that Bitsar was a porter at the bank, and now he feels that if he can hand over Tom to Mr. Bounderby, then he might get promoted to Tom's position at the bank. Now, although the novel shows that whatever actions have been performed by Tom, he actually deserves to face justice. He deserves to be punished for what he has done. And even the plan that is made by his family raises the question that whether exile, even the kind of crime that he has committed, because it is because of Tom's actions that innocent Stephen Blackpool had to die. It is because of Tom that Louisa suffered so much. So even for a man like him, exile is not sufficient, and this is the question that is raised. But then, as far as Bitsar is concerned, we find that it is his whatever he does, that is driven by his self-interest. So it does not have, his action actually does not have any moral foundation. So there are several motifs, that we came across in the opening chapters of the novel are brought in this chapter by Dickens, that the Gradgrind philosophy of education and self-interest, because Bitzar is the product of Gradgrind's teaching. He is the product of education of facts, and therefore it is quite natural that he has no sympathy, no feelings, no emotions for others. So all these motifs are again brought in this chapter by Dickens, because now we find that Mr. Gradgrind is no longer that man who relies only on facts. He himself has abandoned his own philosophy of education, but his philosophy of education and self-interest are very much evident in the motives of Tom and Bitzar and in their actions, because Mr. Gradgrind may have abandoned his philosophy of education, but these two characters, Tom and Bitzar, these two individuals have not been able to overcome it. So we can say that this chapter also serves as a transformation scene, because it is at Sleary Circus. Now, Sleary Circus is the place where Tom and Louisa were caught peeping into the tent by Mr. Gradgrind, and we know how much they were admonished by their father for peeping into the tent, and now it is the same place where we find Mr. Gradgrind sitting. It is the same place where we find Tom hiding himself, and the same people, the circus troupe, who are helping Tom to escape this country. So we can say that the efforts that are made to help Tom escape the country, escape law, are the acts of two loving families. One is the Gradgrind family, because they have love and concern for Tom, and one is the circus family. Why? Because the circus family, with the circus family, Sissy Jupe is associated, and it is their love for Sissy Jupe, their affection, their care and concern for her, that their emotional attachment with Sissy Jupe, that makes them help Tom, because they know that Gradgrind family is the place that supported Sissy Jupe. It is the Gradgrind family that has been taking care of Sissy Jupe, and it is out of their gratitude towards the Gradgrind family that they take the initiative to help Tom. Chapter 8 is titled as philosophical. Here we find Mr. Gradgrind, appealing to Bitzar to show compassionate towards him and towards Tom, and allow them to proceed with their plan for Tom. But as I said, that it is Bitzar's, grooming on it is the result of his grooming that he is unable to show sympathy or compassion to anyone. It is this fact-based education, because Bitzar is the product of this fact-based education. And since he goes by logic, he goes by reason, he is unable to judge the incident, to judge the present situation from an emotional perspective. So it is quite natural for him to have a practical look. So he says that it would be really impractical to let Tom go. And moreover, we know that whatever he is doing, if Bitzar returns Tom to Mr. Bounderby, that he might get promoted to Tom's position. So it is his vested self-interest that makes him all the more determined to hand over Tom to Bounderby. Now here Mr. Sleary, the horseman, plays along. He is the one who actually cheats Bitzar plans, and he tells him that okay, you take away Tom with him. But then later on he informs Sissy and Gradgrind that he has a plan to sabotage Bitzar and help Tom. And later on we find that Mr. Gradgrind and Sissy, they wait in an hotel, in an inn, until the arrival of Mr. Sleary, who finally comes and informs them about the success of the plan, that Tom has been sent safely aboard a ship which is out of England. So while Bitzer attempts to cheat Tom, he himself gets cheated by a double twist in the action, which is carried out by Mr. Sleary in the novel. And it is to be noted that Bitzer's action is driven by his self-interest, and it has no moral foundation at all. Now, here I would like to point out that it is a brilliant stroke on Dickens' part. It has been done really brilliantly by Dickens that the success of this plan is accomplished through the circus animals. Who are these circus animals? The horses, dogs, and these creatures of instinct, who are unquestioning in their loyalty. They never fail to show their loyalty to others, and who stand at the opposite pole from the self-seeking, calculating attitude of Bitzer. So it wouldn't have been possible for Mr. Gradgrind to send Tom away. It wouldn't have been possible for Tom to escape law without the help of the circus family, who are unquestioning in their loyalty, who are emotional, who have the capacity to empathize with others. And that is why they stand in contrast to the calculating, fact-based Bitzer, who fails to have an emotional perspective. So Gradgrind is once again forced to confront, so once again he faces the truth, how he is repaid in his own coin, because this is how, he groomed Bitzer, and Bitzer is the one who was all set to, to make his plan unsuccessful. And this is the circus which was detested by Gradgrind, which was disliked intensely by Gradgrind. And now it is the circus people who help him in saving his son Tom from the clutches of law. And here, while the chapter ends, before the chapter ends, we find that another mystery is unraveled, and that mystery is related to C.C. Jupe's father. He had a dog, Merrylegs, and now the dog returned to the circus, and so Mr. Sleary informs Gradgrind that he returned to the circus meant that Mr. Jupe is no more. He has died. Because we know these animals are too much loyal to their masters, and the dog, after the death of Mr. Jupe, Merrylegs returned to the circus in order to see if Sissy is all right or not, to look for Sissy. And both of them, both Mr. Gradgrind and Mr. Sleary, they decide not to disclose this saddening news to Sissy. They simply wanted to spare her of this pain. And then Mr. Sleary bids goodbye to all of them, and he hopes that Mr. Gradgrind from now on would have a positive outlook with regard to the circus, because entertainment, after all, is a valuable service to people, and he would like to, he would want Mr. Gradgrind to have this view as well regarding circus. Now, as far as Tom's escape is concerned, that as readers we may not sympathize with him, because we know that what kind of actions he had performed, and it is because of him he is responsible for the death of the innocent Stephen Blackpool. But as far as Bitzer is concerned, who always hated Sissy and the circus people, from that point of view, we feel happy, we feel glad that his plan that he was unable to ruin the plan of Tom's escape. And I also said that Bitzer's actions are driven by his self-interest. It is out of his pure self-interest that he is so eager, to hand over Tom to Bounderby. And after the revelation of the mystery of C.C. Jupe's father, the question that whether if he would ever come back to C.C. or not ends. Chapter 9, or the final chapter of Book 3, is titled as Final, because the final chapter is kind of, it serves as an epilogue which reveals to the readers the fate of the main characters, like what happened to each of these characters in the long run. So now we know that Mrs. Parseet and Mr. Bounderby, they quarrel, and now they hate each other for exposing, you know, uh, Mrs. Parseet is hated by Bounderby for exposing him, and then Mrs. Parseet is asked to leave forever, and Mr. Bounderby is also hated by Mrs. Parseet for marrying Louisa. And now she expresses she expresses her grudge, her resentment against him in his presence, that she used to call him, his portrait, a noodle. And then she is asked to return to Lady Scadgers. So from this, in the final chapter, we shall see the fate or the present condition, the present plight of the characters. Mrs. Parseet is sent away to after her quarrel with Mr. Bounderby. She's rewarded with her spending the rest of her days quarreling with Lady Scadgers, because she's sent away by Mr. Bounderby. As far as Mr. Bounderby is concerned, he continues to live for 5 more years, which was long enough to promote a bidzar at the bank. And then after that, we find that after the revelation of the truth regarding his life, he became a subject of mockery in Cooktown. And then one day he died of a fit in the street. As far as Tom is concerned, Tom now regrets for having treated his sister Louisa badly, and he decides to come closer to England. And during his journey, he writes a letter where he expresses his regret, but then during the journey he falls sick and he dies. This is Tom's predicament, final lot, final fate. As far as Louisa Gradgrind is concerned, she does not remarry. Mr. Gradgrind loses his seat at the parliament. He no longer continues to be a member of the parliament, and later on people continue to scorn, express their scorn at him, and he also becomes an object of mockery for all. Stephen Blackpool, after his death, after Stephen dies, he is exonerated. It means that he's relieved, he's released, he's freed of that accusation that he robbed the bank. Rachel continues her life of lonely toil, because now she doesn't even have Blackpool beside her, and she continues the kind of woman she is. We know that she is a saintly woman. She has those saint-like qualities in her. She continues to show pity for Stephen's drunken wife whenever the opportunity arises. Cece is the only character in the novel, who is blessed with a happy family life. Cece gets married, she has children, and she lives a life of happy usefulness. Louisa becomes very attached to Cece's children, and they also get attached to her, but such fulfillment is not achieved by Louisa in her life, because she does not remarry. And if you look at the character of Mr. Gradgrind, now he is a completely reformed character, because now he has been able, we see that he gives up his education of facts and tries to depend on love, faith, charity. He tries to depend on, he changes his philosophy of life and tries to make it, he tries to base it on love, faith, charity, because he has seen the error of his ways, that how his fact-based education damaged the life of his two children, Tom and Louisa. And so now he completely rejected the doctrines that were formerly associated with his name. Grind means he was simply grinding facts into the minds of his pupils. But now he completely gives up his philosophy, and we find that after he loses his seat at the parliament, Mr. Gradgrind, he also loses some of his social status. But now that he has transformed much, now he dedicates himself to higher values in life, to higher ideals, rather than simply dealing with facts, which indicates the change in his outlook. And uh, it is the change in his outlook that may bring him greater satisfaction and happiness in his life. As far as Louisa is concerned, I would point out again that now she has been able to find some balance between reason and imagination that was missing from her early life. So continuing to talk about the final chapter, it's important to note that if you look at the fate of Tom, it appears to be the most appropriate, considering the actions of his life, whatever he had committed, whatever actions he had committed. So it seems that poetic justice is done, that Tom is punished for his actions. Now, when he went abroad, it helped him have that perspective and a desire to come to a reconciliation with his sister, and which he tries to do, and that's why he wanted to come close to England, but then he dies during his journey. And Tom's fate shows that sometimes some mistakes that are committed in life can never be undone. And it is so very true when we look at the fate of Tom. As far as Rachel is concerned, she continues with her life as a factory worker. She's lonely, and as I said, that she continues to take care of whenever Stephen's wife, whenever the opportunity comes. But she's the only character, who doesn't get any specific punishment or reward for her actions. There is no question of punishment for her, because she did not commit any such action which demands punishment. But for her actions, for her good deeds, she doesn't even receive uh, any reward for her actions. Her life continues to be the same as before. The only difference is that now Stephen is not there. But she is such a strong woman, that she does not allow Stephen's death to embitter her mind. Although now she is all alone. She doesn't even have anyone to take care of her, to show affection. But still, even in the absence of Stephen, she does not allow his death to embitter her mind, to make her sad. So she continues to do good to others. She continues to be that. She continues to be that good self, and she keeps Stephen's memory alive by showing compassion to his former wife. This is how she attempts, to keep Stephen alive in her memory, by treating his wife with affection and compassion.